NAFI would like to thank both AOPA and Avemco for their generous support in sponsoring this episode of More Right Rudder. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. My name is Sarah Stout. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI and the host for this podcast. Joining us today is Dr. Keith Roxo from Wingman Med. Keith is an ATP, CFII, MEI, and graduate of the Top Gun program before going to medical school and helping out the aviation community as an AME. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're thrilled you were able to come on and on fairly short notice as well, because we're going to talk about some of these new FAA medical policies today.
Sure.
So these dropped, in like early to mid-December?
Yeah,
Um,
early December they were announced to the AMEs.
And the intended original effective date was January 1st. And
Correct.
so now that's been pushed until March?
Only the defer deny portion of the policy has been
Okay.
pushed to March. The color vision is in effect as of yesterday.
Okay, great. So, yep, we're recording on January 2nd. This episode goes out on January 7th. So, thanks for leading into those two big things we wanted to talk about, the color vision and the defer deny. So, a lot of the talk has been around the defer deny. We'll talk about that second. Let's talk about the color change or the color vision change first, because that's a fairly straightforward one. But we still have a couple of questions. So, can you
Sure.
explain to us what this change is and what people can expect when they go to the AME as a result of this change?
Absolutely. Historically, there were a series of different tests that were accepted by the FAA. And just in the last year, they officially accepted these three new computerized color vision testings. But every exam, you had to go back in, and when you did your distance vision, you also had to do your color vision, things like that. There's also something called FORIAs, which measures the eye alignment. So you have to have, within certain eye alignment, because if your eyes are too far out of alignment, then that can cause double vision. So color vision generally does not change. And there are a few medical conditions that can disrupt color vision, but they're pretty rare. And those would likely be diagnosed via some other method than your AME exam changing your color vision. So the FAA has decided that they're going to only accept these three new color vision tests as of January 1st. But part of that change is that now color vision, unless you have one of these other medical conditions that has yet to be released by the FAA, it is a one-time test. So if you have passed one of the accepted tests previously, any of the accepted tests previously, not just the new computer test. So any previous passing of a color vision test is considered acceptable, and you no longer have to take a color vision test. So for the vast majority of existing pilots out there, this is just one less thing that has to be done at the AME exam. Now, for new pilots, that's where it becomes a little bit problematic. New pilots must take or new applicants, somebody who's never had an FAA medical before, they must take one of the three new computerized color vision tests that's approved by the FAA. That can be done a number of ways. Some AMEs will have purchased one of these tests, but many so far, from what we've seen, especially as it's fairly new, do not have the new color vision test. So if you are a new applicant, first time applicant, you're going to need to get one of these tests done. So you're going to want to find out if your AME of choice has these before you go in for that exam. Because if they don't, they're not going to be able to complete your exam. You're going to get your exam deferred to the FAA, which will lead into the second part of the process, which could result in a denial starting March 1st. So if you can't get that test done at the AME, that's perfectly fine. You can go to an optometrist or an ophthalmologist as long as they have one of those tests, and you can get a report of your score and present that to the AME, and that will be accepted as long as it is one of the three approved tests.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions I wanted to dig into there that you addressed. So the top one off the bat was, are AMEs set up for this? And it sounds like it's kind of a mixed bag, because it was very short notice, and I imagine I don't know if this is like subscription software where they just pop up a website. Is this a specific piece of hardware that they need to purchase, which then that would have probably a longer lead time or something like that?
So it can be both. There's three tests. The Wagoner test is the cheapest at about $1,000. You can buy it as a software to run on an existing laptop or an existing iPad. You can also buy their equipment to go with it, and that's a little bit more expensive. And then it's just a dedicated piece of hardware. We actually purchased the Wagoner system a couple of years ago before it was even introduced, and I won't say we had any influence on this, but we had been petitioning the FAA, like, hey, why are you not accepting these new computerized color vision tests? They're accepted by the military, they've been proven. And it just took a little while for the FAA to get around to it. So we'd had the Wagoner even before it was accepted because we'd been working with that company to try and help get the tests approved. But that one is the cheapest at about $1,000, can be a software download. Really pretty simple. For the Rabin cone test, that one is about $4,000 or $5,000, and that can also be a software download, but that is significantly more expensive. And then the city color vision test comes out of England. We looked that one up at Wingman Med because we contemplated like let's just get all three. Well, that one is $16,000. So that is very expensive. Now, what we've talked to a few other AMEs who've asked us about it, and we're like, just get the Wagoner test. And if somebody can't pass the Wagoner test, that's not your fault. They have to pass one of the three. You can send them out to a dedicated eye specialist who may have the other tests as well.
Okay. Yeah, because the other question I've seen kind of floating around online with this, if this is a software download, are there any hardware requirements? Because of course, when you're displaying this on screens, yeah, I
Mhm.
still have a 20-year-old TV that I had in college that, is its picture as nice as the one I bought on Black Friday? Like, no, not even close. So
Yeah,
is there specifications for the hardware that AMEs are showing this on?
there are, and I'm not going to be able to quote those offhand, and I'm most familiar with the Wagoner, but if it's not up to the specs of the software, then it just won't run on the system.
Okay, so there are some background checks. We're not too worried about people putting this on some ancient device with an old CRT
Sure. Yep.
thing, and then having airmen then having issues because of the display itself, not so much their vision.
Hmm.
So a couple safeguards checked in there. All right, so one thing I experienced in kind of early in my career related to vision is I went in to my AME just for my annual. I was on a second class at the time, so went in once a year, and I failed the vision test.
Hmm.
And I was shocked because it had been about 10, 11 months since I'd been to my optometrist, but I didn't think my vision had changed or anything like that. And so they said, well, if you think your eyes are fine, which I was pretty confident they were, they said, we can hold your application for 14 days. You
Yep.
can go to your optometrist, get an exam, bring back a letter. And so that's what
Yep.
I did. And sure enough, my vision was unchanged. It was perfectly
Hmm.
fine on my current prescription, and I took it back. So if someone were to have an experience like that with this color vision, they would still get those 14 days.
Yes and no. So they can get those 14 days. AMEs, once an AME types in your confirmation number from MedExpress and opens up that exam, they have 14 days to submit it.
Okay.
Does that mean all AMEs will grant you that 14 days? Not necessarily. And I think one of the things I spoke about on one of the previous podcasts was that like not all pilots are created equal, not all AMEs are created equal. Some of them they just don't want to deal with repeat visits and things like that. So they're just going to submit it as is. Now, I'm not saying all AMEs are like that. There's definitely a large number of AMEs that we hear about that they will grant you the, hey, you need to go get this done in the next 2 weeks, or hey, your blood pressure's out of spec. I need you to go to your primary care doctor. If you can get it done in 2 weeks, great. If not, I've got to send it in deferred. So yes, the possibility is there. It will depend on the AME that you go to, whether or not they give you that full 14
Okay.
days. What I would say to anyone who wears glasses, whether it's reading glasses or distance glasses or combination, ideally you're going to the optometrist once a year anyway.
Hmm.
Why not coordinate that before your regular exam? So So that way you don't have a 10 or 11-month gap just in case there is a change. So if you're going in, even if you're going in every 2 years because you're over 40 and you're a third class, if you know you're going to be going in November, just coordinate that you do your optometry the month prior or a few weeks prior. So that's a good way to plan to not have an issue like that.
Yeah, and like that was how I learned about this 14-day
Mhm.
window. And yeah, I think I had kind of gotten caught in that cycle where, I had gotten a job, so I had to go get that second class kind of off
Mhm.
cycle. And then
Uh,
of course, now I have I have a little notebook that I like diligently write down all of my medical appointments in. But of course, for insurance purposes, I can't go back until the day after I was there last year. So
yep.
that can be a bit of a delicate balance, if
Sure.
you've got to get your medical done in a certain month or before a certain month for your job, but you're kind of perpetually kicking the ball down the road by at least a day for your medical
Right.
and vision insurance. So yeah, in an ideal world, that would be great. So the other question I had was, and you briefly touched on it already, if the AME says, go to your optometrist and get the color vision test, or maybe you kind of want to head it off and get the test done, say you are going to the optometrist a couple weeks
Mhm.
before the AME, can they write a report about your color vision? And would they have to specify that it was one of these three new tests? Because I just did the color vision
Yes.
test at my optometrist like 2 weeks ago, and they just pulled the tattered old book
Yeah. No, it
out of the
will have
drawer.
to be one of the three tests, and the
Okay.
score has to be on the results, and it has to be very clear what test it was and what the score was, and the AME has to upload it as part of the exam. So for anyone looking to, again, the only people who really need to do a color vision test now are going to be new applicants
Hmm.
or people who had a SOTA or LOE for a third class and who are looking to upgrade to a first or second class. And if the AME doesn't have it, yep, they can go to an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, but that score report has to be submitted to the FAA with the exam. Kind of like folks who need an EKG, it gets scanned and uploaded for the FAA to review. That's what this color vision test is going to be. But
Okay.
once that's done, once it's passed that one time, that's it, no more.
Okay, good. Yeah, I didn't realize it was, there was like, a computerized like objective pass fail type
Mhm.
score. I say I've always just read my two numbers and identified the seaweed looking thing and moved on with life at vision exam. So,
Mhm.
all right. Any other details we should be aware of on color vision before we move on to this defer and denial policy?
No, I mean, we get some other questions about, the first or second class that has a SOTA or an LOE. If you have no restrictions, then you're fine. You don't have to take a new one. And other people ask, well, how do I prove to the AME that I've already passed? It's like, well, just bring in a copy of your current certificate that has no limitations or your most recent certificate that has no limitations. Obviously, if there's that limitation for not flying at night or by color vision signal, then that's going to be a problem because it means you didn't pass previously or you didn't pass on your most recent one. Another question we get is, what if I passed 5 years ago, but then I failed last year and I got the restriction? Well, if you're on the restriction, you're on the restriction. So you have to pass one of the new color vision tests. So we got a lot of those questions in the weeks leading up to the end of the year. And we told a lot of people like, go try and pass another one right now before January 1st, because otherwise you're going to be subject to the new tests.
Okay. So yeah, so now that we're after January, flight instructors should just be extra cognizant if they do encounter any new applicants who may be communicating that they have some sort of color deficiency, that this is
Well, and that's something,
not there.
obviously, I'm a big fan as an instructor of people doing discovery flights. But one of the things that really drives me crazy as both an instructor and an AME is no one should start actual training without a medical. No one should start a formal ground school with a school. No one should start flying lessons and be told, don't worry, get your medical right before solo. No one should ever be told that because so many people, again, they treat it like it's just a trip to the doctor and it's not, it's a check ride. And if the CFI doesn't prepare them, now it's not the CFI's job to teach them how to pass a medical, but they should be passing that information on. Hey, I'd like to start flight lessons. Okay, you need to pass your medical first. Otherwise,
Mhm.
people are wasting significant amounts of time, energy, and money. Um, there are a lot of schools that we've spoken to, like U.S. Aviation Academy, to name one. A lot of the Part 141 collegiate programs, they absolutely will not start you if you don't have a valid medical.
Mhm.
But there are a lot of smaller Part 141 schools or Part 91 programs that they'll start people, they'll take money, and somebody will move cross country and they're like, yeah, and they don't make sure they have a medical before they get there. And nowhere was it really emphasized in their introductory materials, you must have a medical before starting. And they're just like, oh yeah, you'll get one before you solo. And then
Right.
they can't, you know. So that's a big deal. And especially with this, because not all AMEs are going to have one of these color vision tests. So people have to have a plan for how they're going to get this color vision test done.
Yeah, and are AMEs required to become equipped with these tests on a certain timeline?
No, they aren't.
It's fascinating that there wouldn't be required to do something to have the equipment to do something so baseline for an initial certification. Hmm.
I think part of it was that they didn't want to force the AMEs to have to buy the equipment. And because the AME doesn't have to do it, it can be done by another doctor. Now, contrast that if you want to be a senior AME, you are required to have an EKG machine. You could argue that you could get the EKG at a cardiology office or a family medicine office. So why is that required and not the new color vision testing? I can't answer that. But that's the way the FAA has set up the color vision, that the AMEs are not required to buy it.
Hmm. Okay, well that's an interesting construct, but I guess it's what we have.
Mhm.
All right, so let's move on to the big one. That color vision changes, they came out and almost immediately got swept under the rug with this
With the
and
defer and
defer. And
deny.
yeah, it was there. I
Yeah.
remember seeing it on social media, and then I think it was within a function of days. I didn't hear about it again, and it was all about this defer and denial policy.
Mhm.
So this has been delayed until March.
Correct.
So we have a little bit of time to educate ourselves on what's coming. So can you talk us through just kind of the basics, like where do we may this have come from, just some of the background information on this change?
The FAA has told AMEs that the reason for this new policy, and I'll get into the details of it in a second, is specifically to speed up processing times within the FAA review for medical certificates. Right now, processing for cases is average about 6 to 9 months. Certain cases, like neurological cases, cardiac cases, they can run up to 12 months. Some of the more complicated mental health cases, like standard track ADHD or use of antidepressant medications, those are taking 15 to 18 months. So some of these cases just take a long time. Now, part of this, let's do some background. The FAA is processing over 400,000 exams per year, and that rate has been increasing at about 10% a year for the last decade. That's what the FAA has told us at some of the training sessions we've gone to. Yet they are only operating at about 75 to 80% physician staff.
Hmm.
So, and they have
Crazy
not,
math.
yeah, and they have not increased the number of available spots in that same 10-year period. So they're dealing with the same total number of staff, but while they're dealing with that same total number of staff, they're not even at full capacity. So they're not at full capacity for the staff, and the staff has not increased in comparison or in step with the number of exams that come in. So what you get is this backlog that continues to grow and grow and grow. Now, they've tried doing a number of things to push decision making down to the AME. That's the khaki protocols. That's the AME assisted special issuance. That's these decision tools. So they give the AMEs a lot of tools to be able to issue the exam based on the paperwork provided. The downside is not all AMEs want to do that. We've had clients of ours who we have fully prepared. They have all the documents. We've looked at them and said, yes, that looks great. And then they go to a local AME who's like, oh, you have these problems. Oh, I have to defer you. And it's like, no, no, no. Wingman Med says that my paperwork is good. You just have to review it. And they're like, nah, I don't have time for that. And so then they just defer them anyway. Now, how is the FAA looking at this policy to speed up timeline? This policy says that when the FAA gets your case for review, so it's been deferred to them, if it does not have everything they need to make a decision, they will deny your application, as opposed to sending a letter saying, we cannot confirm or we cannot, issue a certificate at this time.
Mhm.
Please provide the following. They're just going to say, your application has been denied because you did not provide everything you need. If you would like reconsideration for your application, here are the things that we need. So I think lost in this whole messaging is the FAA will still tell you what you need, but until you get that, your application is in a denied status rather than a continued deferred status.
Mhm.
So you'll get that initial deferral. And if you don't have anything, it will become denied until you provide everything. Or if you have everything, then you'll get your certificate from Oklahoma City or your regional flight surgeon office.
Okay, yeah, I hadn't heard that they will still send that list along with the
Right.
denial. So that's maybe a glimmer of of a silver lining. You're at least still going to get the information.
Mhm.
How would it work if someone discovers something like at the AME's office? Say, like you said, they go to their personal physician, annually like they're supposed to. Their blood pressure is normally good. They go to the AME and all of a sudden it's outside
Mhm.
of the accepted levels, but they wouldn't have all that paperwork for the
Right.
khaki. What about that squishy range?
Well, then they need to go to their doctor as soon as possible and start working on getting it. So that's really the big thing. That's going to be few and far between. Yes, there are people who find something at the AME's office. That is relatively rare. It's typically more typically what we see is people just simply don't prepare for that medical exam. They know that they have certain medical conditions and they expect the AME to either walk them through the process or they expect to get deferred and the FAA will come back and ask. Or they expect that, well, my doctor says I'm fine. And, I will say, well, can you show me the paperwork that your doctor says you're fine? And they're like, well, why would I bring that with me? It's like, well, because you're trying to tell a third party government safety organization that you're fine and they would like proof. So they don't necessarily just want to take your word for it. So I think more often than not, it's yes, your situation or what you described is going to happen. The plan for that then is going to be start figuring out what you need to do and start working on it and sending it into the FAA as soon as possible to help avoid that denial or understand that if I don't get this paperwork in quickly, I'll end up getting denied and then I'll have to send it in as soon as I can. Being denied is not really the end of the world for most people. You're already deferred. So if you're going in for an exam and you don't have a current medical, so let's say you're starting from scratch or your last medical was 15 years ago and you're just getting back into flying, you already can't fly. So the difference between a continued deferral and a denial while working on getting that medical is really pretty insignificant. You already can't fly. Um, this does impact certain folks who operate on basic med as a backup. If you don't prepare and you don't get that in, well, now you're denied. Now your basic med is invalidated. Or if you go into the AME, we see this a lot. People get upset that they didn't get their medical and they say, well, now I'm just going to go fly light sport. Well, now if you don't finish the process and get a medical, you will be denied and you will not be able to
Hmm.
fly as a sport pilot. So those are the people who this is really going to impact the most. I know that some of the folks who wrote the FAA concerned about this. They're concerned about having to report denials. In my experience, the vast majority of companies, sure, they may ask if you've ever been denied before, but for the most part, what they care about is do you currently have a valid medical? So I think the FAA's goal is to try and get pilots to treat the medical exam like a check ride. It is a certificate, like a pilot certificate. And now that the CFI certificate doesn't technically expire, it just goes out of currency. The FAA medical certificate is the only one that actually expires. But most people don't treat it like a check ride. They don't prepare for it. They don't show up with everything that they need. And then they get a little upset when the FAA starts asking questions.
Yeah, so that preparation piece is key, because like we've touched on before, and I've seen this mentality for years, and I still see this mentality on social media of just go into it. Your AME will tell you everything, or you'll get a letter from the FAA. So kind of this expectation that that's the process. So we're kind of this is trying to force a change in that
Right.
whole paradigm.
Right.
And you should be preparing for this, because that will make it. You could potentially turn a deferral into an office issuance
Absolutely.
by being prepared. I've experienced that as well, by going to my AME with a stack of paper, and thankfully he was one of those AMEs. He told me to sit in the waiting room, and I was there for like 3 hours, and he looked at every piece of paper I brought in, and I walked out with a medical. And so I was Hail Marying back to the office to clear my calendar for the day, but I sat there.
Right.
And and it worked. And so that can happen. But otherwise, the other thing I'm seeing a lot of on social media about this is, oh, call your AME in advance and they'll talk you through everything. So you've hinted at, not all AMEs conduct their business in the same manner.
Mhm.
Some are purely AMEs and may spend more time on this. Like my AME that I go to, he's part of an occupational health
Mhm.
thing and does all sorts of medical exams.
Mhm.
So how realistic is it to expect that people can just call up their AME on a Tuesday morning and say, "Hey, I'm going to be reporting A, B, C, and D. What do I need?" And they'll
Right.
sit there and spell out, because some of this can be incredibly detailed.
Right. We like to say that there's three types of AMEs. You have the high volume AME where they're cranking out 20 to 30 exams a day. That guy has no time to help you. He's just too busy cranking out, medical exams. Anything complicated, they don't have the time. They don't have the time built into their schedule to handle those kind of phone calls, nor do they have the time to go through lots of paperwork. So that type of AME generally is not going to be as likely to help you if they are a high volume exam practice. Um, then you have the very low volume exam practice. Now, that's going to be more a family medicine or internal medicine doctor who's maybe in a community or on the outskirts of a city who's only doing it for one of a couple of reasons. They got a buddy who's a pilot and said, "Hey, I don't like my AME. Can you get this qual?" Or there's just a little bit of demand so that they went ahead and got it. Um, or they see an opportunity to fill their schedule with some cash payment as opposed to insurance payment type exams. But that AME likely doesn't do many exams a year. They're probably doing the minimum 5 exams per year. Maybe they're doing 10 or 15. They're going to their training probably every 3 years, which is the mandatory, but they don't necessarily do the monthly grand rounds. They're probably not members of, CAMA or ASMA, which are two of the kind of bigger aviation medicine associations. Um, so they don't handle a lot of exams and they don't handle a lot of complicated exams. So when you ask them, they're probably not even going to know the answer, probably not even going to know how to do it. Now, the question is, are they going to take the time to figure it out and walk you through it? Maybe. It really depends on how their business practice is set up. But if they are a regular doctor seeing patients all day, they're again unlikely to give you the time to figure out what you need. Then there's kind of the niche AME, and that's the one who does a moderate number of exams, but has time built into their schedule to answer these types of questions. So, how do you find these guys? So, one way to find them is to start calling around and asking questions. Um, One of the questions you can ask is, "Hey, are you a member of ASMA? Are you a member of CAMA? Do you go to the monthly grand rounds that the FAA puts out for AMEs?" If they say yes to those things, they're probably a high quality AME who's going to be able to help you. If they don't know what any of those things are and you have a complicated problem, they're probably not going to be able to help you. That's kind of some techniques to screen an AME if you have an issue. And then there are services like ours. Literally, our business was born out of the fact that most AMEs will not do what you are discussing. So we created a business out of being a remote AME to help somebody regardless of where they are. And then for the most part, they can still go to their regular AME to get the exam done, and we help them prepare. Many times, clients, it's a mandatory deferral anyway. So the AME at that point doesn't really matter. You just need them to do the exam and submit the paperwork. Even if they don't submit the paperwork, you can submit it yourself. Boom, everything goes in. FAA has what they need. Ideally, you'll get issued your certificate, and then you don't have to worry about the defer deny process. Um, or there are those situations where we'll tell a client, hey, you have everything you need, but this is not standard. This is a little complex. Your AME may not give you your certificate, but technically, by the rules, you are eligible to receive your certificate. You might want to make sure you track down an AME who really knows the rules. So we'll tell people that too, or they're welcome to fly to our office in San Diego where we do in-person exams and have us do the exam. Um, so that's kind of how our whole business was born out of this prepare for the exam in advance. And it's very interesting to see that now the FAA is even, it's almost like they're advocating that, yes, we like the Wingman Med way of doing business.
Right. And it does, I can see where it's going to save them time. And
Hmm.
it is a lot of work on the airmen because when I had, a medical event, it wasn't, we didn't think it was going to put me into deferral territory. And I was working with a specialist. I worked for AOPA at the time. So I worked with their medical crew.
Hmm.
But it was a lot of work. Like I had to
Hmm.
call, gosh, two or three different doctor's offices, and I had to like navigate like the basement labyrinth of
Yeah.
the hospital to get to the
Yep.
records department.
Hmm.
And they all look at you like you have three heads when you got to fill out the form on why you want this record. I'm like, well, I got to tell
Right.
the FAA.
Yeah.
And so it is more work on the airmen, and it's yeah, is the AME, going to help them out, or are they going to require them to set up a whole preparatory like office visit that then they're also gonna have to pay for.
Right.
So
And that's
things like
another
that.
thing. We'll have a lot of people say like, or we'll see it online. I asked my AME for help and they wouldn't help me. It's like, okay, well, how much did you pay your AME? This is a medical professional who has a certain hourly rate that they normally charge for things. And if
Mhm.
you pay them $150 for an exam and expect them to do 10 to 15 hours worth of work for you, that's a that expectation is not in line with reality. But yeah, if you're asking an AME to help you with a complicated thing that takes, 5, 10, 15 hours of their time, you should be prepared to compensate them for that. And we charge for our consultation service. We would expect any AME really to charge for their consultation service as well. But again, does that AME have that built into the schedule? And as we go to different events with AMEs, whether it's some of the training events or some of the specialty associations, many of them are very surprised at our business model. They're like, well, what if nobody books a call? Or what if you don't have cases to work? Now you're leaving time open on your schedule that you're not making money in. So medicine is most physicians' offices are not nonprofit. They are businesses, just like a lawyer's office or an accountant's office or any other professional service, architects and things like
Flight
that. They
instructors.
flight instructors, right? Nobody really wants big open gaps of time on their schedule. They want to fill that with paying clients and paying customers. So that's one of the things that the AMEs that we speak to are concerned about when we talk about our model. They're concerned about leaving 4 or 5 hours a day open on their schedule to do the consultation work. And so they just don't want to risk it. They don't want to do that. They just want to fill their day with exams and then move on, if they get a complicated case. And we're more than happy for them to refer people to us. Some of them say, no, I'm just going to keep filling my day with exams. And if somebody's got something weird, I'll send them to you.
Well, right, because that's a good point to make that the AMEs are businesses.
Hmm.
Most AMEs are AMEs because they enjoy working with the pilot population and or
Right.
perhaps like yourself, they've got an aviation background. It's something they genuinely enjoy doing, but they still have to pay their staff. They still have,
Right.
we're talking about the overhead of buying
Yep.
these systems plus all the other equipment just to get through the test. And you probably have to rent a building somewhere and
Right.
or at least part of a building. And these are real costs and like
Hmm.
the electric company doesn't care that you
Right.
the goodness of your heart wanted to do all these consultations. You still got to pay
Yeah.
the electric bill.
Hmm.
So we may see more AMEs, maybe consider opening up more time, paid consultation time, maybe
Hmm.
not half the schedule, 4 or 5 hours a day certainly sounds like a lot. If that's not your primary business model, but that will take time. They
Sure.
may, they're not going to shift their business model overnight because of the potential of something most likely. They'll kind of dabble a little bit here and there. So, I think one of our big takeaways from what we've discussed so far is spend the time to do the homework, and is for flight instructors, make sure you're telling your customers that, hey, this, you may be making a lot of phone calls to different AMEs to ask
Right.
these questions,
Hmm.
and find out if someone can do this. And the thing to remember here is there's still most applications, what it's like 97, 98% are issued in the office. So we're still only
Hmm.
talking about those small percentage who are
Right.
deferred, but for those folks, it's a
It's
big
a big
deal.
deal. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And this is also where I think AOPA is a fantastic value. Their pilot protective service, costs a little bit more than the baseline membership, but they do have their medical certification staff that can answer a lot of questions. We actually recently came to an agreement with the AOPA where we are now their sole recommended advanced medical help for folks that are still struggling, or it's a little bit more complicated than even the AOPA medical certification staff can handle. But really, they do provide a lot of. Now, they're not going to tell you which AME to go to. You still have to do that part, look
right.
for the AME. But they can certainly provide. I have a feeling that with this new policy, they might have to plus up their pilot protective service staff um, because they might get a whole lot more members.
Right. And then, yeah, so to get through this process, because it certainly helped me, because when I had my medical thing, it was kind of between like, is it this, is it that? And thankfully everything at the specialist checked out okay. And I was able to be issued, but yeah, it's in the weeds, because at the end of the day, and we had an episode of More Right Rudder that I'll pop a link into with the pilot lawyers. We had a podcast with them over the summer. And, this is essentially a legal proceeding based on medical facts. And so you've
Mhm.
got to make sure that you're getting all those medical facts correct for
Mhm.
them to be able to issue this technically legal document.
Yeah.
And so making sure you've done all your homework and are working with the highest quality people you can to get through that. And for pilots, so much of it is ignorance, for lack of a better term. Like, I
Right.
didn't know there were multiple AME associations until you were mentioning them, and it's just not something that's taught to flight
Mhm.
instructors. Hey, ask this
Sure.
question of your AME or that, or make sure this. And now this comes out, and we're bumping up against individual AME's business models on if they'll
Mhm.
help you out or not, or even if they want to, do they have time in their
Right.
schedule? Because sometimes, I mean, even trying to book a doctor's appointment anymore, it's 2, 3 months out. So if
Mhm.
you have an event, now you want your consultation 2, 3 months out, you find out you need to
Right.
get XYZ testing, now you're months down the road, just to
And
even
then
get
it,
to the exam.
Right. And then if you even have um, multiple issues or something that's complex enough that requires different specialists, now you have to coordinate all that because the FAA doesn't want anything really older than 90 days. There are certain times when they want historical information, right? They might want the surgery reports and that kind of stuff. But
Mhm.
when you're talking about I need a current evaluation for my medical exam, they don't want anything older than 90 days. So if you're trying to coordinate two, three, four doctors' appointments, that can be difficult. You have to figure out which one is the one booking the furthest out and then book all the other ones around that time as well. Because if they can be booked earlier, you don't want to be too early, right? You don't want to
Right.
start, okay, well, I need to see a pulmonologist. Sweet, he can get me in next week. I need to see a cardiologist. He's 4 months away, so I'm going to book that now. Well, now you just spread out those appointments by more than 90 days, and that pulmonologist visit is a wasted appointment um, because you're going to have to go back and see him again also. So there's a lot going on when it comes to the details that matter and that coordination. And so people, we've helped some folks who have kind of been in a fight with the FAA medical for over a year, and they are very upset with the FAA. by the time usually we're done talking to them, they understand that they have not been following the rules. And that while they're still upset that the process has taken so long, we can usually articulate why it has taken them so long. Um, and I think that was one of I think I kind of went through the story scenario in the webinar that I did with NAFI, where they sent in something and that contained a new piece of information. So the FAA came back and said, well, tell me about this. So then they sent in that note, and that note had a new piece of information. And then they said, well, tell me about this. And then they sent in a note from somebody who wasn't qualified to write it. And so they asked for the same thing. So those details matter, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's really like any other check ride. The ATP check ride is significantly different from the the CFI check ride, which is significantly different from the commercial check ride, which is significantly different than the private check ride. They all have different sets of standards. And so that medical certification has a standard. And if you don't know it, it's worth talking to somebody who does.
Yeah, for sure. Because like I said, it's not hard for this to be a months long
Mhm.
process. And like you mentioned before, you don't want to be going through that flight training, or have your career
Mhm.
derailed for that many
Right.
months. Presumably, that's the money you're paying your mortgage with, and all that kind of stuff too. Um, so for flight instructors, we've talked a good bit, and there's some good nuggets in here so far on what we can do to help new applicants and aspiring pilots get through this. So the vast majority are still going to get through their medical exam,
Mhm.
no sweat.
Yep.
Uh, but for those who do, we want to make sure that we're referring them to an AME who can help them. Well, not maybe necessarily referring them to, but educating them on,
Right.
hey, ask this question of your AME, use this resource, or,
Mhm.
do some of your own homework on how this is done. Because the other thing I've been seeing online that I wanted to chat to you about was people are saying, "Oh, hey, there's no resource from the FAA on like what are we going to need to get through this?" And then
Yep.
invariably someone pops up and says, "Well, there's the AME guide." I'm like, "Well, that's
Right.
like 700 pages and written for people who went to medical school, which is like not me."
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, um, as flight instructors, like what, when someone says, 'cause still the average age of the student pilot, even with all of this growth, is still like what in the late 30s to early 40s, somewhere in
Yeah.
there. So, that's late enough in life. You can still definitely be t checking some interesting tick boxes on the form, or you still
Yep.
could not. But if they say, hey, I've had, XYZ event, or I had a surgery for something, um, what, should we tell people, hey, go check out the AME guide? Or is there?
So I think that's a reasonable thing to do because it is the official source.
Okay.
Now, and that's the answer that I will provide. Same thing, when people say something online like, hey, there's nothing that says, what you need. Actually, there is. It's the AME guide. Now, that does not contain every single thing. If you look up insomnia in the AME guide, it's going to tell you that it's not compatible with certification, but it's not going to tell you how to get through a past diagnosis of insomnia. So it doesn't have 100%, but it's probably the 95% solution. Again, will you understand it? Maybe, maybe not. Some of it is easier to understand than other things. At a minimum, what you can see is, oh, I am taking this I have this condition. I am taking this medication, and this says that I should be able to get my medical if I have the right paperwork. I don't know how this is supposed to be written, but I'm going to take it to my doctor and say, hey, can you write this, what they're asking for here? And then you're probably going to be okay. Um, but again, that doctor has to write a note that is good enough for the FAA standards. Many times, doctors are not writing complete notes that the FAA is looking for. They're writing what we call an update note. They saw you 6 months ago, they're just writing an update from 6 months ago. The FAA doesn't have the note from 6 months ago. So they want the one note that they get to kind of be all encompassing, especially when it's the first time you're disclosing something to them. So referencing the AME guide is always a good option because it is the official kind of the official source, right? Another option, and this isn't trying to like just push us, but we have a MedExpress simulator on our website. And there's three options on the review. You can have no review. And so if you are a brand new person coming to aviation, so if you're a CFI and you've got a brand new person looking to start training, and you say, hey, make sure you get your medical before you actually start paying for real training. And if they're like, well, how do I know how to do that? Again, send them to our blog and we have all kinds of articles like your first FAA medical, how to do it, all that kind of stuff. So our blog is just a huge free resource. Well, that MedExpress simulator can also be done for free. If you go through and you check no to everything, or you're only checking like yes to like seasonal allergies and really nothing major, then don't pay for a review. But you now know what questions are going to be on the real thing before you go fill it out. One of the other beauties of our AOPA membership or AOPA partnership is that AOPA members can fill out that MedExpress SIM review, and the review will be done by the AOPA staff, their medical certification staff, and they will provide feedback. And then for people who want a review, but they're not AOPA members, well, then they can elect to pay for us to review. So that's a minimal charge. It's $50. So it's not terribly expensive. And then we will say, hey, this is going to cause a problem, or everything looks pretty good, or make sure you answer this question with a little bit more detail. Now, we're not going to give them an entire consultation plan because we're just seeing how they answered questions. We're not looking at records as part of that. But it's a good option for people to get a heads up on, is this thing going to be, doable or not? And then again, like I said, our blog on our Wingman Med website has tons of articles on how to get through certain processes or how to approach your medical exam. And then on our Pilot Doctors AME blog, we put a recent article in there is on finding FAA medical certification help. And that's where we have those lists of questions. And we talk about groups like AOPA, and we talk about individual AMEs, and we talk about consultation services like ours. Obviously, we're fans of ours, but we talk about what questions to ask of an AME.
Mm-hmm.
So, which fits you and which fits your situation. And so, not to read the whole article, but kind of by the end, we say, look, if you're a member of a group like AOPA that has a service, hands down, that should be your first place to go. Like, you already have them, you already have access to them. Why would you not ask them questions? They stay up to date. They know the vast majority of the material. Chances are they're going to give you the right answer. So that should always be your first place to go if you are already a member. If you are not, you can consider becoming a member to get that benefit. After that, we talk about here's how you evaluate an individual AME to determine if they can help you with your problem or not. So we give some of those questions, like I mentioned earlier. These are the questions you're going to ask to find out if they can help you. And then lastly, we talk about the consultation services. Find out who's actually the one helping you. Is it a physician? Is it not a physician? What are their qualifications? Are they a pilot as well? What is their board certification in? Like, what kind of physician are they? Are they an OB-GYN doctor who likes to do aviation stuff for fun? Or are they a board certified aerospace medicine doctor who happens to be an ATP and a fighter pilot? So, who's probably got a little bit more experience, right? So those are the things. Like, ultimately, your top option is going to be someone like Wingman Med, but not everybody needs our level of service. And so, you know, we don't help people who have a cold. I have a cold. I need help getting a medical. No, you don't. You're going to be just fine. Right. So
Right. Yeah.
not,
Give it a
not,
week and
yeah, just
just
don't
wait.
go to your exam while you're sick and you're probably going to be okay. So not everybody needs our help. Um, we think we are the best service out there for people with real complex issues or those who are having a real difficult time understanding what they need. But there are many levels. And so that article is on our Pilot Doctors website on how to figure out which level of service you need and how to vet the service you're actually thinking about using.
Hmm. And one other thing I wanted to make sure we touched on here, in relation to flight instructors, is a lot of these people who are struggling with these medicals may be applying for certificate levels, first or second class, when they're, private pilot weekend warriors. And so like if basically, unless you're looking at career advancement and you need that, maybe first or second class to even apply for career advancement jobs, like if you're a third class airman or, perhaps more professional level, but you've retired and are now only exercising private privileges, there's no real benefit in applying for that higher level of medical certificate.
Yeah, it is interesting. The vast majority of applicants are looking for a first class, and we will tell people if you are considering a professional career, you should try and get a first class now, and then
Hmm.
you can let it downgrade to third and just renew at third until you're actually ready to apply. But you should make sure you can get it. And if you ever have a new medical condition pop up, you should go for the highest level that you think you will need. But overall, I agree with you. Not everybody needs a first or a second class. And many people are just fine with basic med. I think basic med is really a fantastic option. Obviously, there are some limitations.
Hmm.
We have many clients who they don't like the limitations of basic med. They fly a turboprop, they want to fly in Class A airspace, or they live along the northern border and they want to be able to overfly one of the Great Lakes, which is going to put them in Canadian airspace, or they want to fly to Alaska, which means they have to go through Canadian airspace, or they want to fly into Canada and land somewhere there. So basic med is not accepted in Canada. You can't even fly through Canadian airspace on basic med. So there are a lot of people who are not happy with the basic med limitations. But if you meet the criteria for basic med and you can handle those limitations, there's really nothing wrong with that. Same thing with light sport. If all you want to do is go zip around your local area and you're not going very far, then there's nothing wrong with light sport. A lot of people want to have that option to carry more than one person, though.
Hmm.
And then we get a lot of people asking us about Mosaic. And I just won't even talk about it because it's not here. Nobody knows when it's actually going to be here. Some people will say, well, maybe I'll just wait until Mosaic comes out. Okay, well, it sounds like you've been waiting 30 years to start flying. Sure. What's another 4 or 5? Who knows how long?
Right.
Or you can finish the process and get your FAA medical and then go to basic med and be just fine. So it
Right.
really just depends on how much time and effort and energy people are willing to put in.
Hmm. Yeah. So, that's just something else for flight instructors to think about when they have those new customers coming in, especially if they are people who are only planning for recreational purposes, or at least only planning recreational at a time. Don't get more than you need, really.
Yeah. So with that said, there's not a terrible amount of difference between a third class and a first class. So there's some minor vision things. You could be 20/40 on a third class, whereas first and second, you got to be 20/20. There's a few cardiology things, but that's getting pretty specific. Other than that, the major difference between third and first class is how frequently you need to be seen. So
Hmm.
it's not unreasonable I mean, I completely agree with you. Don't go for something if you don't need it, but it doesn't necessarily make it easier or speed the process up just going for a third class.
Okay. Well, that's good information to have on there. All right. Is there anything else other than, we have to sit tight until March and see I always say we're not anticipating this policy will change, but who knows?
Yeah.
Anything else that of the known information right now that we should add on?
No, I don't think so. I think, my message is kind of what it's always been with Wingman Med, which is prepare for the exam like a check ride. Even if you don't think you're going to have a problem, it's beneficial to, read some of our blog articles or do our MedExpress simulator or join a group like AOPA and just run through the process with them to make sure.
Hmm.
People do mock check rides all the time. Do a mock check ride for your medical and make sure you're not going to have a problem rather than discover a problem at the exam.
Right. Know what you're getting into.
Hmm.
Uh, For sure. So, all right, Dr. Roxo, we definitely appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and hopefully we'll see you back on the show again sometime in the future.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Listeners to the More Right Rudder podcast can get $10 off their NAFI membership. Use the code POD49, POD49 at checkout at nafinet.org. This code is good for both new and renewal memberships.